Recently, I got the chance to play Elden Ring Nightreign early at a hands-on preview event hosted in Vegas. In case you missed it, Nightreign is the next game From Software is releasing, and according to them, it's a quote, co-op action survival game. What is it really? It's essentially Elden Ring remixed into an action roguelike for 3 players, where each run sees you fighting enemies and collecting loot in a shrinking Fortnite-esque circle. When the circle fully shrinks, you're forced into a nighttime boss fight. The game has you fighting Elden Ring enemies and bosses, but you'll also encounter bosses from past Dark Souls games occasionally too, like the Nameless King. If you make it to day 3, you get to fight one of the 8 Night Lord final bosses, and winning here equals a successful run. I was unfortunately not allowed to record my own footage at the event, but I was given 17 minutes of B-roll showcasing a good chunk of the experience. Now, I do have a lot of opinions about my time playing the game, but first let's go over all the footage in sequential order, as I think it paints a pretty clear picture of what to expect from the gameplay loop. I'll interject with my thoughts along the way, and save some of my bigger opinions and critiques for the end. Each run begins with a short cutscene of your chosen Nightfarers walking toward a cliff before running to catch a lift from a Spectral hawk. There will be 8 characters to choose from in the full game, but there are only 4 in the demo, and I'll talk about what each one can do as they appear. Next, you're thrust into the game with an aerial view of the map as you glide down on your hawk, kind of like a Fortnite glider, though you don't have control over where you get to land. The game forces you to drop off in the spot it's chosen near the edge of the map. It's pretty odd that you can't choose where to land or influence the flight of the bird, because I think it'd be pretty fun to have more agency over where to start. But hey, that's just me. Also, the text Day 1 pops up on the screen because, you guessed it, it's Day 1. As I already mentioned, the game is split into 3 days, where you explore during the day and fight a boss at night. Each day is somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes long. I didn't time it, but I'm pretty sure it's within that range. Upon landing, you have a few different choices on where to go, but these players chose to go after the nearest enemy camp, something my group often did as well. This also gives us our first look at Wylder, the strength dexterity knight, and his grapple hook ability. As you can see, it pulls small enemies closer, but when used on larger ones, Wylders launch toward them instead. Each character has one unique ability like this that's on a short cooldown. There's normally a big icon at the bottom of the screen that displays the ability and lets you know when it's available to use. Also, this is pointing out the obvious, but it's worth mentioning. This combat is literally Elden Ring. Like the animations, the enemies you're fighting, this is Elden Ring. Ultimately, this makes Nightreign feel like an ambitious fan mod for Elden Ring as opposed to a standalone product. And I don't mean that necessarily as a bad thing, but I do feel compelled to point this out because it's pretty core to the experience. After clearing the camp, the group runs toward the nearest site of grace. This showcases the new super sprint, which is basically the normal sprint at double speed. This is mostly used for traversal because the map is big and Torrent's on vacation. You can also use it during combat, but it's tough to pull off because it'll drain your entire stamina bar almost instantly. Anyway, they run up to the site of grace to replenish their healing flask and level up. You start each run with 3 flasks, and each site of grace will refill them all. Sites of Grace are also where you can level up using the runes you acquire from enemies and bosses, just like Elden Ring. However, unlike Elden Ring, there isn't a way to pick and choose stats. Instead, you just click the big level up button, and you'll simply be stronger with extra damage, health, and FP. I'm a little mixed on this, as I think it's a missed opportunity to provide the player with a choice on how to build their character, but it does fit the theme of the game with them wanting to keep things quick and streamlined. So maybe it's for the best. Regardless, leveling up is important as the boost in damage from level 1 to level 2 is quite noticeable. More damage means enemies die faster, and in this game, speed is everything. Next, we see the player attack a group of demi-humans, and they do this by throwing a firebomb. So yes, consumables such as firebombs are a thing in Nightreign, and you begin each run with 4 inventory slots to hold different types of consumables. You can also see that the player broke some glowing crates, which dropped additional consumables for them to pick up. Between your inventory being very limited and finding plenty of extra consumables, you're heavily encouraged to use these whenever you have a chance. After this, the group encounters a Golem, and I believe it counts as a mini-boss. Mini-bosses are scattered across the map, and you'll know you're fighting one because a boss health bar will appear at the bottom of the screen. Upon defeat, the mini-boss will drop a purple soul, and this rewards each player with the choice between 3 upgrades, ranging from a new weapon to a permanent passive boost. Examples of the passives I saw were a slight increase to stamina regen, or a slight increase to damage reduction. And to be clear, all 3 players get their own reward from the 1 purple soul. This next clip showcases the new wall climbing mechanic. When you press jump while sprinting toward a wall, your character will automatically run up the wall and then mantle over the ledge. This is sick. It adds an additional layer of verticality to the map, and it can be fun figuring out how to get from point A to point B, since sometimes you'll have to use the wall climb in slightly creative ways. At the top of this church, the player finds some loot on a body and inside a box. Important to note is that all loot you find like this is classified as community loot, meaning that every member of the team can see it, but only one person can take each item. This is also our first look at the different armaments you can find. Each weapon and shield has a built-in Ash of War, and each spellcasting catalyst has 2 different spells. So yes, in this game, the spells you cast are attached directly to the catalyst. Each armament also comes comes with a built-in passive effect, such as extra damage on combo finishers, additional item discovery, or HP restoration upon attacks. These are mostly small background bonuses, but what's interesting is that each of these passive effects applies to your character even if the armament isn't actively being used. As long as it's equipped, you get the effect. This means that you always want to have 6 armaments equipped, especially because equip load isn't something you need to worry about in this game. You'll always be fast rolling. This is also our first look at blue colored loot. This indicates that it's more rare, and the rarity goes from white to blue to purple to orange. Next, we catch a glimpse of the map screen, and this should give you a better idea of the scope of each run. The map itself is an island, and on the edge, you can see the Fortnite Circle closing in. Just like Fortnite, instead of constantly getting smaller, there are intervals where it doesn't move at all. I won't go over all the icons on the map, but basically, these show you where most of the points of interest are, like enemy camps or fortresses. You can then pin on the map where you want to go, which is useful because the other players will be able to see your pin and know where you're going. Also worth noting is that some things are hidden on the map, so it's possible you'll find something good even if it's not marked from the start. Between this and the marked points of interest, you probably won't have time to do everything, so you have to make quick decisions on where to go and what to skip. Next, we see Wylder use his grapple hook to get a little extra speed when running around. It's tough to see here, but this use case is also relevant during fights. Instead of grappling the boss, it might be worth grappling the ground to reposition. We then see Wylder take on another mini-boss, the Leonine Misbegotten, and he initiates the fight with a big fire explosion. This is Wylder's ultimate ability, so unlike the grapple hook, which is on a short cooldown, it's usually a minute or two between uses of the ultimate, and I believe dealing damage increases the speed it fills up. Wylder then lands a critical hit, and this is a good time to point out that some of the weapon animations have been changed. So the Greatsword moveset, for example, is a bit different. It feels a little faster and more aggressive, which is well suited for the faster pace of Nightreign. This fight also gives us a look at Wylder's unique passive ability, something each character has. Once per run, you can cheat death. The first time you get hit by an attack that would kill you, there's a flash of white followed by a quick dodge. The first time it happened, I thought it was some sort of perfect block, but no, it's Wylder surviving an attack he shouldn't have. Finally, Wylder's group shows up. But oh no, one of his teammates goes down. So in Nightreign, instead of dying immediately, you enter a down state where you can crawl around. Not to keep bringing up Fortnite, but it's like Fortnite. However, unlike Fortnite, to revive your teammate, you actually want to attack them. After dealing enough damage, they pop right back up. The HUD for reviving looks something like this in-game, a ring split into 3 equal sections above your ally's head. This ring represents how much damage you need to deal to bring your friend back. The first time they go down, only one section needs to be depleted, but each subsequent death adds another section, so it gets tougher and tougher to keep reviving. I think this may reset if you don't get down for a while though. You have 15 seconds to get revived, and if your friends fail to get you, you'll lose a level and respawn at the last site of grace you touched. This won't end a run, but it's still a pretty brutal punishment given how important levels are. Next, we have some footage of another Nightfarer, the Guardian. This bird person is the tank of the cast, with the most HP and a more defensive playstyle. Their active ability is a whirlwind that knocks small enemies up and staggers big enemies. They also have a special defensive stance they can enter, which seems to significantly decrease the stamina you lose when blocking attacks. This stance is their unique passive trait though, and not an ability on cooldown, so you can use it whenever you want. Most importantly though, they have a sick-ass dive bomb ultimate that lets them crash down for massive damage. This also showcases one of the best things about the revive mechanic. You can simultaneously hit enemies while reviving your teammates, and the dive bomb is probably the best example of why that's useful. They don't show it here, but if you keep holding down the ultimate button after landing your dive bomb, you remain crouched down with your weapon in the ground, and this provides a defensive buff to yourself and nearby allies for up to 10 seconds if you keep holding it. I also think you're immune to staggers and take heavily reduced damage while holding this stance. The next clip shows off the Fortnite Circle. It takes the form of a blue ring of fire. If you find yourself outside the circle, you slowly take damage over time. Believe it or not, as much as everyone, myself included, keeps joking about the Fortnite comparisons, I think the time pressure this circle adds is one of the more compelling parts of the gameplay loop. Basically, it encourages you to play efficiently. You don't just want to clear the camp full of enemies, you want to do it fast. And then it makes the moments in between fights interesting too, because you gotta make quick decisions on where to go and how to get there. This is fun, and pretty distinct from playing Elden Ring. Speaking of how to get places, one way to do that is by making use of Slipstreams. These function pretty much identically to Spirit Springs in Elden Ring, and they allow you to super jump into the air. These were fun in Elden Ring, and they're still fun here. And it's cool how you can sometimes use them to reach the top of structures they might not have been intended for. Up ahead, the group finds a Church of Marika, and if you collect the item inside, it upgrades the maximum usage for healing flask by 1. Every church like this will have this upgrade, so you can always plan ahead and stop at 1. Next, the group finds a Scarab to kill. This is an example of one of the many useful things you can find that might not be marked on the map. These guys always drop a talisman you can equip, and these talismans seem to function identically to how they do in Elden Ring. The passive boost they give can sometimes be substantial. We then have some more camp clearing gameplay, though these enemies are tougher than the ones at the start. This clip also gives us a better look at the Guardian's whirlwind move and how it can knock enemies up. One significant change from Elden Ring is how enemies no longer get periods of invincibility when knocked down, and this is especially useful for moves like the whirlwind attack if your teammates follow up. Also, notice how the magic swords of Carry and Phalanx appear over Wylder's head without him casting a spell. I believe this is an example of a passive upgrade he got from a Miniboss. The way this one works is that every 30 seconds or so, these swords will appear over your head for free damage. Next, we get another grapple shot clip. And yes, it can be used to break the guard of an enemy using a shield. The group then finds an underground passage leading to a treasure room, and this gives us another look at the loot system. Once again, this is community loot, and the players must share. You can also see that there are level requirements attached to weapons. Blue is level 3, purple is level 9, and orange is level 12. Remember, there aren't stat requirements like Elden Ring, and you just have one overall level. If you find a spectral tree, you can summon a spectral hawk to carry you across the map. These follow set paths, and the little floating spirits show you the general direction it'll take you. You can also see the path it'll take you on the map screen. What's cool about these spectral hawks, as opposed to the ones at the start of the match, is that you're given a little control in steering them, and when you want to land, you have more freedom on where exactly you want to touch down. This is also our first look at the third character, the Duchess. She's basically the nimble rogue archetype of the group. The players also find a treasure map on a desk in this fort, and this reveals the locations of more points of interest on the map. Also, this location is literally Fort Haight from Elden Ring, like one-to-one copy-paste. Not every location is like this, but some of them are, and it's incredibly trippy seeing iconic areas like the Gatefront ruins dropped into this remixed version of Limgrave. I'm not too bothered by this, but this is another example of ripping things straight off Elden Ring, and it plays a big role in this feeling like a well-made fan mod as opposed to a standalone game. Next, we get some proper Duchess gameplay and a look at her ability, Restage. This replays the damage an enemy or boss just took over the past 2 seconds, and as you can see, it's especially impactful when it's paired with something like Wylder's ultimate. For only being on a short cooldown, this is easily the strongest ability in the game. It's also a great example of co-op synergy and interactivity that usually isn't present in other FromSoft games. This clip also shows an important change to critical hits. In Elden Ring, bosses and enemies are immune to damage from teammates for the duration of someone landing a critical hit. But in Nightreign, that's no longer a restriction. However, I think bosses might take reduced damage from other hits during this window, so that's not too overpowered. One last thing to note about this clip, the Duchess's passive gives her a unique quick-step Bloodborne dodge that's noticeably faster than the other dodges. She also gets a cool little backflip if you dodge backwards twice. Check out this dagger moveset, by the way. This is much different than Elden Ring and way faster. Definitely a fan of this change, and I can vouch that it feels great to use. Next, we get to see the Duchess's ultimate, which applies invisibility to herself and the rest of the group. This is obviously useful when sneaking up on enemies, but I also found it useful even in the middle of a boss fight, because attacking doesn't seem to break stealth. You can still get hit, but yeah, it has its uses. Finally, we get to see the fourth character, the Recluse, aka the Spellcaster Witch. Big fan of her design, by the way. And I already know this is going to be Zully's main. Like any good spellcaster, the first thing she does is jump off a cliff, and this demonstrates another cool change to Nightreign: no fall damage. The group then approaches an Everjail. To open it up, you'd find a stone sword key and then use it on the nearby stone imps. This then unlocks the boss fight. Next, we get a look at the Recluse's unique ability, Magic Cocktail, and it's probably the coolest ability in the game, but it's weirdly complicated, so buckle up for a long explanation. So when you hit an enemy with a spell, they get marked by the corresponding element. The 4 elements are magic, fire, lightning, and holy, and in this clip, the enemy gets marked with magic. Then, when you use her ability, it sucks out the elemental mark. In addition to restoring FP, this also fills in one of the 3 circles on the ability icon with the element you just sucked up. You repeat this 2 more times until all 3 circles are filled up, at which point using it a 4th time will expend the elemental icons and cast a special spell. Now here's the crazy part. The Magic Cocktail spell is unique and depends on the combination of elements you absorbed. So like, magic, magic, magic is different than magic, magic, fire is different than magic, fire, lightning. Since there are 4 different elements, this results in 14 different potential spells you can cast baked into just one ability. And you kind of have to remember them because they have different ranges and uses. Hell, some of them don't even deal damage. Fire, Fire, Holy, for example, creates a healing aura for yourself and nearby teammates. But the fun doesn't end there. Not only can you suck elemental marks out of enemies from the spells you cast, you can also suck them out of elemental damage your teammates deal. For example, here Wylder uses a fire attack on the boss. This applies the fire mark, and the Recluse is able to suck the fire right out. And guess what? The damage your teammates take also counts. So if a teammate gets hit by a fire attack, you can lock onto them and suck it out the same way you would for an enemy. So yeah, this kind of kicks ass, and it's super fun seeing a needlessly complex move put into a game like this. The Recluse also has a pretty useful ultimate. It's called Song of the Blood Soul, and it marks all nearby enemies with a blood icon. Hitting a marked enemy will restore HP and FP, and your teammates can hit them too for the same effect. Lastly, the Recluse has a unique dodge animation where she floats around. I like how elegant it is, and I feel like it perfectly fits her design. Next up, we see the group running through some mines, and shout out to FromSoft for sending us all this hand-picked footage, yet leaving in a T-posing miner. No hate, genuinely funny that slipped through. Anyway, yeah, you can find mines like this during runs, but when I was playing, I felt like these were too out of the way to be worth it given the time pressure. Plus, I didn't find anything super useful inside. Maybe they'll change though, or maybe I missed something. We then get a look at a camp full of flame chariots. When I was playing with my group, we made the mistake of heading to this camp at the very start. This is not a level 1 area. These guys are tough. If only there was a way to reach the weak spot on the top of their head. Oh wait, you can use the new wall climbing ability to jump up and hit it for free. I wish I was aware of this during my play session, but hey, now we both know. Next, we see the group take on a dragon boss fight. Not much to say here, as we've seen most of this stuff already, but pay attention to the time of day. As it slowly changes to nighttime, that's your cue that you should start wrapping up whatever you're doing, because the circle begins to rapidly shrink at this point. You can see the circle closing in as they finish off the dragon. From here, what you want to do is look for the floating golden tree in the sky, as that's the point where the circle will close in. Eventually, the ring of fire reaches its smallest size, and essentially forms an arena. This is where you'll fight the first major boss. Before the boss fight, a small group of enemies will spawn in. This serves as both a warm-up for the fight and a teaser for which boss you're about to see. In this case, it's a pack of demi-humans, so fittingly, the boss fight is a demi-human queen and a demi-human swordsman. Something I appreciate about Nightreign is that these fights seem specifically designed for multiplayer, something we don't typically see in FromSoft games. In this case, it's due to there being 2 bosses at once, but I also encountered other bosses that are better examples of this. One of those bosses was the centipede demon from Dark Souls 1. During the fight, you can chop off its centipede limbs, but this forms an additional hazard as the severed limb keeps fighting. This is perfect for a group battle. Also, in case you're curious, its moveset seemed to modify from Dark Souls, so it wasn't like FromSoft just ported the boss into Elden Ring without making changes. I don't know exactly what those changes were, but I could tell that it felt different than Dark Souls. Another modified nighttime boss we encountered was Morgott. He was mostly similar to his appearance in Elden Ring, but he had a few new moves, including this insane AoE blood slash that would hit the whole group and nearly one-shot us. He also had new dagger throwing combos, and just seemed more aggressive overall. If FromSoft is going to rely on reusing bosses, I appreciate that these changes make it feel new-ish and suited for co-op. It's a shame they didn't seem to make any meaningful changes to the demi-human boss fight, but oh well. Anyway, after completing the fight, you get the message Night Repulsed. The boss also drops a purple soul, and upon interacting with it, you get a choice between 3 different upgrades for your character. This is basically how it works when killing mini-bosses too, but the upgrade from this main boss is more substantial. Sometimes these upgrades operate purely in the background, like extra spell duration, but my group occasionally encountered some more interesting upgrades. One time, one of my teammates got an upgrade that created lightning bolts whenever he dodged. Another one he found cast fireballs whenever he walked. And I do mean walked. Like, slightly tilting the left stick was the only way to trigger it. While the walking one wasn't super useful, both of these upgrades were cool because they weren't just background percentage buffs to stats. They were noticeable abilities that had the potential to shift our playstyle, at least a little bit. After everyone chooses an upgrade, fog rolls in and the Ring of Fire fully recedes. From there, Day 2 begins, and you get to continue exploring the map to get stronger before Night 2. Worth noting is that enemies and bosses defeated during Day 1 don't respawn, so it's a good idea to keep track of where you've already been. So yeah, the gameplay loop you've seen repeats for Day 2, and if you survive the Night 2 boss, you're immediately taken to the Night Lord on Day 3. As such, Day 3 consists of just this boss fight with no exploration phase. You progress to Day 3 by walking along a pathway to a door that reminds me a lot of the area and door at the end of Shadow of the Erdtree. The Night Lord of the demo was Gladius, a 3-headed dog monster that swings around a giant sword on a chain. This guy is no joke. Also, for those of you who haven't played all the Soulsborne games, this is in fact the first boss that's completely unique to Nightreign, and I suspect the other Night Lords will be completely new as well. This guy also has a pretty devastating grab attack, so I recommend not getting hit by it. During the fight, one of Wylder's teammates goes down, and here they showcase the ability to revive teammates with ranged weapons like bows. This is surprisingly useful, and it might be worth holding on to your ranged weapon just for situations like this. Speaking of ranged weapons, you don't have to worry about ammo in this game. It's unlimited. Around the halfway point, the boss explodes into 3 fireballs and then reforms as 3 separate dogs. This is probably the toughest part of the fight, and I think the best strategy is to try to take on each of them one by one. When I talked to Vadi after the event, he told me he just ran away until they reformed into one body, so that might be an even better strat, even if it's boring. Either way, this is Nightrein's best example so far of a boss designed for 3 people, and I hope the rest of the Night Lords have similar co-op mechanics. And then win or lose, that's the end of the run. Okay, that's all the footage I got, but there are still a few things they didn't include footage of that I think are worth mentioning. First, you can find spectral merchants across the map. Merchants sell a variety of consumables and weapons, but given how important leveling is, we often didn't have enough runes to spare. Like, for example, they would sometimes sell a legendary weapon for 40,000 runes, which for this game is quite a bit. They also seem to always sell a pouch that gives you 1 extra consumable slot for the rest of the run. Next to each merchant is an anvil, which you can use to upgrade your weapons. To upgrade a weapon, you need to find a smithing stone of the corresponding rarity, and then upon using it, it levels up your weapon to the next tier. So for example, a blue weapon would turn into a purple weapon. This also means that it's technically possible to level up a white weapon all the way to orange. I don't think the weapon itself changes during this upgrade process, aside from just getting extra damage. Also worth noting is that non-combat consumables like smithing stones or stone sword keys take up inventory space, so they might get in the way of all those fire bombs you want to carry. When exploring, you can find plants like rowa fruit scattered around sometimes. In Elden Ring, this is a crafting material, but that's not a thing in Nightreign, so instead they just restore a bit of health right when you pick them up. There are similar blue plants that restore FP too. There are also mage towers just like Elden Ring. You know, the ones with the little puzzles where you gotta find the spectral turtles? Those are here too. Though when we found one, we kind of just hit the statue at the front and it opened up immediately. So it's unclear to me if there's more to unlocking them in the full game. But yeah, they have loot inside. Another thing you can sometimes find is a glowing red body on the ground, which is the location that someone else failed to run. If you interact with the body, some loot pops out, and I assume it corresponds with whatever weapons they had at the time they died. Sometimes you'll come across weird hazards during your runs. One time, my group found a big purple bubble floating across the sky. When we approached it, a swarm of giant ants poured out. I don't totally remember how this played out, but I think we got a mini boss reward after defeating them. You can also get invaded by bosses sometimes. This sadly didn't happen to my group, but I was talking with the others who had Margit invade them out of nowhere. What's cool about this is that can happen at inconvenient times, like when you're fighting a big group of enemies or another boss. Do you deal with it? Do you run away? Do you reposition to a better location? All of these are interesting questions that result in some fun emergent gameplay. Stuff like this has the potential to be the defining moment of a run, where things go off the rails in a fun and memorable way. In theory, this is one of my favorite features in the whole game. I could be wrong, but I don't think there's a maximum range for receiving runes from killed enemies. You can see an example of this in the first clip of the Duchess, where she receives runes from her teammates killing enemies all the way over at the fort. This is interesting to me because it leaves the door open for strategies where you might want to split up. Like, imagine splitting up and clearing 3 camps at the same time. That might be faster than doing it together. However, one reason not to do this is because of how shared rewards for mini-bosses work. Killing a mini-boss gives each player their own reward, but only if they approach the purple soul that it leaves behind. We also found a reinforced chest, which functioned in a similar way and let each player claim a reward from it separately. Another tip, normally when you get downed, your teammates only have 15 seconds to revive you, but this timer is removed during the main nighttime boss fights. Along with this, in case it wasn't obvious, if everyone dies here, the run is over as opposed to simply losing a level. Let's go over some details from the hub area too. Just like Elden Ring, the round table hold is the hub. To begin a run, you approach the table and select the Night Lord you want to hunt. It's vaguely similar to selecting a monster to hunt in Monster Hunter. The game then immediately puts you into matchmaking to find a group to play with, but you can also use passwords just like Elden Ring to play with friends. The hub is also populated by all of the playable characters, minus whatever character you're currently controlling. They all just stand around and say hello in the demo, but I'm guessing the full game will have them giving you bits of their story between runs in a similar fashion to Hades. There's also a sparring ground area and an outside area connected to the round table hold. Here you can test out every weapon in the game and set your character level from 1 to 15, which I assume is the max. This is neat, and I took advantage of this during my play session to test out how damage scaling worked. So stats like strength and dexterity are hidden. Like, I genuinely couldn't find a stat screen that showed them, and you can't manually raise them when leveling up, but they do still exist, and different weapons scale with different stats just like Elden Ring. To test this, I spawned in a legendary greatsword with a C scaling in strength and made my character level 15. On Wylder, the strength dex guy, a two-handed light attack dealt 348 damage. On the Recluse, the intelligence character, it only dealt 191. The Duchess also dealt 191, and the Guardian dealt 299. So what this means is that even though you're free to use any weapon you find during a run, you still probably want to stick to your character's archetype, or else you'll have to deal with a damage penalty. I have mixed feelings about this, and at the very least I don't think it should be so hidden, but it is important to know so that you can be more effective during a run. The last main component of the hub is the Relic altar. Here you can equip relics between runs, and each of these gives you some sort of bonus or new ability. You can equip up to 3 per character, but they're color-coded, and the relic slots are color-coded too. For example, one character might have 2 red slots and 1 blue slot, and that means you're only allowed to equip 2 red relics and 1 blue relic. I believe there's 3 or 4 different relic colors. What do these relics do? Well, a lot of them are sort of boring stat bonuses, like +4 strength or extra damage with X weapon, but a few of them are actually interesting as they can change up how you play. My favorite was the relic that enables group healing whenever you drink from your flask. This is straight out of the Elden Ring Reforged mod I played last year. I loved it then, and I love it now because it adds another layer of interactivity and synergy between players, where you're paying attention to their positioning and their health in a way that you might not have otherwise. Another fun one that's kind of similar was a relic that gave the effects of consumables you use to all nearby allies. One clutch use of this was using a gold pickled Foulfoot right before we killed the boss, so that all 3 of us got extra runes. Some relics are character specific, such as the one that gives Wylder a combo attack he can use after his grapple shot that also sets his weapon on fire. Big fan of that one too. So yeah, I only got to see a few relics, but if the full game includes more of these impactful and gameplay defining cool ones, and less of the plus 7% to fingernail growth rate ones, I'm on board. That's about all I found in the hub, but I believe they gave hints that there would be more NPCs in the full game, such as a shop where you can buy and sell relics using a special currency earned after each run. And they also said something about being able to unlock skins for each character, which I assume are just cosmetic. Okay, that about does it for details on the content of the game. So let's talk a bit about the preview event itself that I attended in Vegas. So the event was unfortunately a shit show in which people were constantly disconnecting due to network issues. Like, truly, it was a disaster that almost stopped us from playing at all. Basically, we got split into groups of 3 and sent to tables where there would be 3 PS5s at each table. Then, like clockwork, every 5 to 15 minutes, at least one person in each group would get booted from the game with no way to reconnect. From there, we'd be forced to either restart completely or push on with only 2 people while the game kept the same difficulty intended for 3. Every single person who attended this event experienced these issues, so I'll be curious to see how other attendees discuss this. I was grouped with Lobos Jr. and Ouroboros, and of the many runs we attempted, we didn't get through a single one without disconnect. We also experienced a couple desyncs where enemies would be invisible for one player while appearing normal for the other, though these only occurred after a disconnect, so it might be a non-issue under normal gameplay conditions. Despite these tech issues, I do feel like we saw pretty much everything in the demo, and we did make it to the end. So I'm doing my best to evaluate the game independently of these disconnects, and giving FromSoft the benefit of the doubt that the actual game won't have these issues. The leading theory is that the event space Wi-Fi was just kind of fucked with too many devices being on it. I'm leaning toward this being true, as the European Bandai event didn't have these issues. Regardless, I'm telling you this because I think it's important context that this is how I first experienced the game, and it's a shame I'm forced to relay my experience to you through the lens that we scuffed event. Quite frankly, I think US Bandai messed up badly, and I'd be kind of pissed if I was FromSoft. Aside from that though, I did have fun. And while I think most people would have fun if they were in my shoes and got to play a co-op game with Lobos and Oro, I do think FromSoft has something here if I was able to find the fun even in the worst of circumstances. Ultimately, I think this game will be a commercial success. The fun is there and it has Elden Ring's branding. Obviously, it won't reach anywhere near Elden Ring's success, but it doesn't have to, because my guess is that it only cost a fraction of Elden Ring's budget to develop. And of course it did. 90% of this game is just Elden Ring, and like I mentioned earlier, it feels more like an ambitious fan mod than a standalone product. On that note, I think it's worth addressing the discourse surrounding this game. When Nightreign was first announced, there was naturally a lot of excitement, but there was also by far the most cynicism I've seen directed at a FromSoft project. And like, I obviously get it. The game is built out of recycled content from Elden Ring, you have bosses from past Souls games returning with seemingly no context, and the official messaging is calling it a, quote, survival game. That's all going to make people imagine something akin to Metal Gear Survive or Resident Evil Reverse, games that bastardize the IP in the name of chasing a market trend. It's a cash grab, it's publisher mandated, Miyazaki sold out. There were quite a few comments expressing these sentiments, and I'm sure some comments on this video will say the same thing. Again, I do get it. These claims aren't coming from nowhere, and there is of course reason to be skeptical. Now, even though I understand all of this, I'm not quite that cynical. Basically, I can appreciate that FromSoft wants to make a weird spin-off game on a smaller budget while giving someone who's been at the company since Dark Souls 1, Junya Ishizaki, the chance at directing their own game. This is a practice that is pretty uncommon for AAA studios, and I think it's a shame because it leaves the industry with less experimentation and risk-taking in general. If every game by a large developer costs at least $100 million to make, you're going to see most studios play it safe. Is Nightreign the best example of FromSoft taking a risk? No, not at all. This game will sell well on brand recognition alone, but the point still stands that small projects are a space for larger developers to try new things. And I do think Nightreign experiments with the Souls formula in interesting ways we'd never see from a mainline game. All that being said, I was skeptical before I even played the game, though it wasn't coming from a place of cynicism toward the industry. It instead was coming from a place of love for the action roguelike genre and wondering if Elden Ring could fit into it. Basically, Souls-like combat is inherently simple, and its ability to be compelling depends a lot on other aspects of the game. Take Dark Souls, for example. Combat is a core pillar of the experience, yes, but it's held up greatly by the other core pillars, like level design, thoughtful enemy placement, and exploration. But with a roguelike, due to the randomized nature of the game, you usually just have the combat, and Dark Souls combat without anything else is like butter without toast. To me, it was obvious that there would need to be a lot more to make a game like this work. And they did indeed add a lot more. From the time pressure to the character abilities to the co-op synergy to the map traversal mechanics, FromSoft added quite a few gameplay elements to help support Elden Ring's core combat system. So is this a complete success? I'm honestly not sure yet. I'm somewhat optimistic, but for me, a lot of it is going to depend on how much more there is to the full game. Because right now, based off what I played, I have some concerns, and the full picture isn't clear. Most of my reservations stem from me being unsure of the roguelike aspects of the game, and worrying that runs will feel too similar too quickly. For starters, it's unclear to me how much the map will change between runs. For this demo, as far as I could tell, it didn't change at all. We would start at one of two locations, but then that was it. All the points of interest were in the same spot, and we'd fight the same enemies and bosses. Now, of course, I do recognize that this is almost certainly just for the demo, and that the full game will meaningfully remix the map between runs, but I need to see that for myself before I vouch for this game. When I asked the Bandai representatives if they could clarify how the map would change between runs, or if there was more than one map, they were pretty cagey. They did talk about how swamps and volcanoes could drastically change things up, and the initial reveal trailer did seem to show a bit of this off, but until I see it for myself, it's unclear how meaningful these changes will be. That being said, I'm reasonably optimistic, and if I had to guess, I think the map will change a lot based off which Night Lord you select before each run. The other concern I have is just the variety in builds between runs. Due to the nature of most upgrades being small passive boosts, the way you start and end each run might be a little too similar. To put it another way, you know how in a game like Hades, you get multiple gameplay defining upgrades that massively shift your build or playstyle? That part of the game is inherently less present in Nightreign. Sure, you'll find a weapon that gives plus 9% damage when two-handing, but in terms of moment-to-moment gameplay, having or not having that boost isn't going to change how you play. The same can be said about the whole leveling system. Yes, leveling up lets you deal more damage, but the way you play doesn't shift between level 1 and level 2. And as someone who's played a lot of action roguelikes, this is a notable absence. Now, to be fair, not all upgrades are like this. Stuff like the passive that gives you a lightning attack when you dodge, or the relic that gives you group healing are meaningful changes and can noticeably impact a run. So I really hope the full game has more of that. And thinking about this issue some more, we shouldn't ignore all the weapons and spells. Elden Ring might actually be a fantastic game to turn into a roguelike, if only for the variety of weapons and spells already built into the game. There are over 400 weapons and over 200 spells in Elden Ring, and the average Elden Ring player probably only used like less than 5% of them. But in a game where you have to use what you find and be kind of scrappy over short, repeated runs, suddenly there's an opportunity to engage with all these weapons and spells you probably overlooked. Plus, Elden Ring has a shitload of different enemies and bosses, so again, they have a deep well to draw from. And that's on top of them bringing back bosses from past Dark Souls games. Yes, this all relies entirely on recycled content, but that doesn't change the fact that it gives FromSoft a lot to work with in terms of variety. So yeah, maybe the leveling and passives being kind of boring is actually fine within the context of the rest of the game. Also, even if the player builds are limited when compared to other roguelikes, I think there's still a lot of potential for emergent gameplay when you factor in the rest of the gameplay systems, like the synergies between different character abilities, or unexpected hazards like bosses invading you in the middle of a fight. There's also a lot to be said about the map itself. It's deeply intertwined with all the other systems. Figuring out the best way to move around the map under time pressure is engaging, and simply where and when you get yourself into a fight can lead to different outcomes. So you like the game? I thought you weren't sure. Pine, you're confusing me. Let me put it like this. As a massive fan of FromSoft, Souls-likes, and the action roguelike genre, I'm in the dead center of the Venn diagram of the potential audience for this game. I had fun playing it, and I think, at worst, this game will be a fun diversion for a couple weekends with my friends. It has a lot going for it. I think the time pressure is compelling. I appreciate all the co-op shenanigans, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't looking forward to fighting Dark Souls 2 bosses with Elden Ring's combat. Since this demo only showed off a small part of the game, I can't be sure about everything, but the potential is there. It'll depend on how some of the systems pan out in the full release, such as how the map changes. That being said, everyone doesn't share my tastes, and the audience for this game will be more niche than Elden Ring. I think people who aren't already fans of action roguelikes might not like it at all. On top of that, I do understand the cynicism toward the amount of recycled content a game like this has. So if that's off-putting to you, I get wanting to pass on this one. Truly, I'm not going to die on any hills defending FromSoft, and I think it's reasonable to be skeptical. The game comes out on May 30th, and it'll be $40 at launch. It's also going to launch with a $55 deluxe edition that'll come with DLC containing new playable characters, new bosses, and new map biomes. The DLC itself won't be available day one, but I think selling DLC at launch is something FromSoft hasn't done before. And while I don't personally have an issue with it, I do understand people who do. And I don't think it's a great look for FromSoft when they already have so much cynicism and distrust surrounding the game. I strongly suspect this will be a source of controversy. So yeah, Nightreign. It's a weird game, and I don't know how the general public is going to react to it. If I had to guess, I'd say it'll be reasonably well liked, but it's probably not going to blow anyone's mind. Like I said though, I think the worst case is I get to have fun with my friends for a couple weekends. So I'm looking forward to it even with all my reservations, and I would love to have the full game surprise me in ways I won't see coming. I also think that this is the type of game that's going to be way more fun with a group of friends rather than two random people you find in matchmaking. So I suspect that'll play into people's enjoyment as well. At the very least, I think it's one to keep an eye on, and I'm extremely curious about people who never tried Elden Ring having this be their first exposure to the franchise. The concept of that is hilarious to me. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Take it easy and look out for another video this month. Peace.